The blizzard wasn't just weather. It was a white-walled prison, and tonight it had delivered 2 broken bodies to his door. Cole Anders had come to the remote silence of the Rocky Mountains to escape the echo of gunfire and the ghosts of men he couldn't save. A former Navy SEAL on a mandatory 30-day leave, his only mission was to find a quiet so profound it could drown out the noise in his head. His isolated cabin, nestled in a stand of ancient pines near the town of Frostwood, was to be his sanctuary. The world saw Frostwood as a charming ski hamlet, all twinkling lights and cozy lodges. Cole knew it of the face, the one of jagged peaks that scraped an indifferent sky, forests so deep they swallowed sound, and a cold that could freeze a man's soul in his chest. This was the raw truth he sought. He was a man built for war, standing 6 feet 2 inches with a frame ridged with muscle and scars. At 35, his face was a roadmap of his past, all sharp angles and a watchful stillness in his brown eyes. The easy smiles of youth were a distant memory, replaced by a grim patience. Tonight, the forecasted storm of the decade was making its bloody entrance. The wind had escalated from a moan to a full-throated shriek, hurling snow not in flakes, but in thick horizontal sheets that turned the world into a chaotic white static. With the practiced ease of a man for whom contingency was a religion, Cole made his final rounds. He battened the storm shutters, checked the fuel line to the generator, and secured the woodshed. Sanctuary was secured. He turned to finally retreat inside, to shut the door on the fury, when a primal alarm bell clanged in the base of his skull. It was a flicker of instinct, a deep-seated sense of wrongness that had kept him breathing in the mountains of Afghanistan. His mission here was peace, but the operator inside him never truly stood down. He snatched his high-lumen flashlight from its hook, its solid, cold weight of familiar comfort. He swept the beam across his property. The light cut a stark, white tunnel through the swirling chaos, illuminating the familiar. The dark trunks of pines, a ridge of rock, a fallen log. Everything was as it should be. Almost. His instincts hummed. Then he heard it, a low, guttural growl, swallowed by the wind but unmistakable. He swept the light back, slower, his eyes probing the edges where the tree line blurred into storm's fury. And there, near his property line, half buried in a growing drift, was a shape. It was too small for a fallen tree, too still for a hunkering animal. The cold click in his gut was instantaneous. Civilians. Civilian mode was off. Operator mode was online. His posture straightened, his senses sharpening. Filtering out the wind scream to focus on the immediate threat. He moved toward the shape, his boots crunching softly in the fresh powder, his breathing a steady, controlled rhythm. As he closed the distance, the beam of his flashlight revealed the impossible. It wasn't one shape. It was 2. The first was a woman. She lay on her side, her skin pale as the snow it rested against. Strands of dark hair were matted to her forehead with ice and something darker. She wore the torn remnants of a police officer's tactical jacket, the fabric stained with what looked like frozen blood. Her hands were wrenched behind her back, bound with thick, coarse rope. Beside her, a powerful German shepherd was in the same horrific condition. The dog, a magnificent male with a thick sable and black coat, was also bound, his legs lashed together. Even in his unconscious state, his body was angled protectively toward the woman, a final, silent act of loyalty. As the light passed over him, a low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, a single, defiant spark still burning. Cole's breath plumed in the frigid air. His gaze instantly swept the tree line, scanning for movement, for the glint of a rifle scope, for any sign of an ambush. Nothing. The storm was their cover, their accomplice. Then he saw it. Pinned to the rough bark of a pine tree just above the 2 figures was a folded piece of paper, already stiffening into a sheet of ice. He carefully pried it free, the paper crackling in his grip. Unfolding it, he saw the message scrawled in jagged, angry black marker. Asterisk, this is what happens to those who don't listen. Asterisk, the words hung in the frozen air, a declaration of savage, premeditated murder. This wasn't a random crime. This was an execution, a message left for the storm to deliver. His eyes dropped to the knots on the ropes. They were professional, efficient. He knew them. He had been taught how to tie them, and more importantly, how to escape them. The cold in his gut solidified into a block of pure ice. His leave was over. He pulled the knife from his boot, but as he moved to cut them free, a terrifying question erupted in his mind. Were the men who did this still watching from the trees, waiting to finish the job? At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another Bond speaks louder than words. The knife was in his hand, but the storm and the shadows held their breath, waiting to see if he would become a savior or the next victim. Cole dropped to his knees, the combat knife cold and familiar in his grip. Hypothermia was a faster killer than blood loss. There was no time for a delicate approach. He made a tactical choice and went to the dog first. A wounded, disoriented animal could be an unpredictable danger in a confined space. "Easy, brother," he murmured, his voice a low, calm rumble against the wind scream. "I'm a friend." He sliced through the thick ropes binding the shepherd's legs. The dog, whose name he would later learn was Kodiak, stirred weakly but didn't resist, a testament to its exhausted state. Next, he moved the woman. He worked the blade carefully under the ropes on her wrists, the fibers parting with a clean slice. The skin beneath was raw and bruised a deep, ugly purple. Her name, he would learn, was Elena. She was a detective with the Frostwood PD. But right now, she was just a life, fragile and fading. He checked for a pulse at her neck. It was there, a faint, thready flutter against his frozen fingertips. Her breathing was dangerously shallow. He looked back toward the faint, warm glow of his cabin, a mere 50 yards away that felt like a mile in the wideout. He couldn't carry them both at once. The wind ripped at his clothes, a brutal reminder that every second spent exposed was a step closer to death for all of them. He made a decision. He shrugged off his own heavy winter coat, the cold instantly biting through his wool sweater, and draped it over Elena's torso, tucking it around her as best he could. Then, with a grunt of effort, he carefully scooped the 90-pound German shepherd into his arms. The dog was dead weight, but Cole had carried wounded comrades through minefields under fire. Kodiak's had lolled against his shoulder, a faint puff of warm breath ghosting against his neck, a small sign of life that fueled his resolve. The trudge back to his old, reliable Ford truck was a battle. Each step sank deep. The wind shoved him back. 50 yards felt like a mile. He reached the vehicle, yanked the back door open, and gently laid Kodiak on a thick wool blanket spread across the seat. He covered the dog with another blanket before turning and plunging back into white hell. Elena was just as he had left her, a small, dark mound being steadily erased by the relentless storm. He knelt, slid one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees, and lifted. She felt as light as a bird, all bones and broken spirit. "Stay with me," he muttered, brushing frozen hair from her face as he spoke. The words were torn from his lips and scattered by the gale. "You didn't survive this just to die on my doorstep." He carried her back to the truck, his own body now screaming from the cold without his coat. He eased her onto the seat next to her canine partner, arranging the blankets to cover them both. For a single heart-rending moment, the unconscious woman and her wounded dog leaned against each other. Partners, united even at the edge of death. Cole slammed the door, the sound muffled by the storm. He circled to the driver's seat, his fingers numb on the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The heater sputtered, then began to blow lukewarm air. The headlights cut a desperate, narrow path through the blizzard as he navigated the short, treacherous drive back to his cabin. He brought them inside one by one, placing Kodiak on a thick rug by the stone hearth and Elena on his worn leather couch. The cabin, which had been his sanctuary from the world violence, was now violated. The air, once smelling only of pine smoke and coffee, now carried metallic scent blood from Elena, the wet dog smell from Kodiak's soaked fur, and the faint, sweet odor of shock. He worked with the practiced efficiency of a field medic, fetching his advanced first aid kit, warm water, and clean towels. As he began to cut away Elena's torn jacket to assess her injuries, he kept glancing at the window. Beyond the glass, the world had disappeared into a churning, white vortex. Whoever had left that note, whoever had done this, was still out there, They had intended for the storm to be the executioner. They would soon realize it had failed. He walked to the front door, slid the heavy steel deadbolt into place with a definitive thud, and rested his loaded shotgun against the wall within easy reach. The storm was locked out, but as Cole turned back to his two unexpected, critically wounded guests, he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than any blizzard ever could. He had just brought the war inside. He had secured them from the storm, but as he looked at their broken bodies, he knew the real fight was just beginning, a fight against time, against their injuries, and against the killers who would soon come to finish what the snow had not. The cabin had become a trauma bay, and the first enemy was a cold that had seeped into their very bones. Cole worked with a focused, brutal efficiency. The cozy living room was now a battlefield. He had stripped Elena of her frozen, bloodied outer layers, covering her with every blanket he owned. Her skin was deathly cold, her lips tinged with blue. Hypothermia was the silent killer he had to defeat first. He focused on his medic actions, checking her core temperature and starting rewarming protocols. He cleaned the head wound with antiseptic from his extensive kit, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with hands built for violence. He left the dislocated shoulder for now. Forcing it back into place without knowing the full extent of her injuries was too risky. He then turned to Kodiak. The shepherd's breathing was ragged, parting the thick fur on his flank. Cole found a clean but deep gash he had cleaned earlier. He reapplied antiseptic, the dog whining softly in its unconscious state. "You're okay, soldier," Cole murmured, using the same low, calming tone he'd used for frightened men in combat zones. "You're safe now." He was wrapping a fresh bandage around the dog's torso when a sound cut through the storm's roar that froze him instantly. Asterisk knock. 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 Asterisk. It was heavy, confident, and solid, not the desperate tap of a lost hiker. His hand went to the shotgun. His mind raced. Asterisk, they found us. Impossible. Not in this. Asterisk. He moved silently to the door, peering through the tiny peephole. A figure was bundled in a heavy-duty, dark green parka, snowshoes strapped to a pack. For a heart-stopping second, he didn't recognize her. Then she pushed her hood back, and he let out a controlled breath. It was Sienna Reed, a local park ranger, one of the few people who even knew his cabin existed. He slid the deadbolt open. "Sienna, bad night for a social call." She stepped inside, stamping snow from her boots and bringing a blast of Arctic air with her. "I was doing a final sweep of the North Ridge cabins before the roads became completely impassable," she explained, her voice clear and steady. "Figured I'd make sure the mountain hadn't claimed another one." Her eyes then fell upon the scene. The unconscious woman on the couch, the wounded dog by the fire, the blood-stained rags. Her friendly, wind-chapped face transformed in an instant, all casualness replaced by sharp, professional concern. She didn't gasp or flinch. She simply met Cole's gaze, her green eyes asking the question. "Found them in the woods," Cole said, his explanation brutally simple. "Left for dead." Her shoulders dislocated. Hypothermia set in deep. The dog took a bullet. Sienna dropped her pack and was at Kodiak's side in a heartbeat. "Let me see," she said, her hands already moving with expert gentleness to examine the wound Cole had cleaned. The shepherd whimpered, and his barely open eyes flickered toward the couch where Elena lay. Even on the brink, his duty was clear. "He's a fighter," Sienna murmured, her focus entirely on the animal. "And fiercely loyal. His gaze hasn't left her." She looked up at Cole. "My truck's parked down the trail. I have a full veterinary kit there. Sutures, coagulants, a salve I make myself that's better than anything you can buy. It'll handle infection. You won't make it there and back in this," Cole stated flatly. The wind hammered against the windows as if to prove his point. "I will," she said, with a rock-solid confidence that brooked no argument. "You keep them warm. Focus on her. I'll handle him." Before he could protest, she had her hood up and was gone, swallowed by the blizzard's furious white embrace. True to her word, she returned 20 minutes later, a human snowdrift carrying a large, weatherproof case. She was breathing hard, but her eyes blazed with purpose. While Cole continued to try to raise Elena's core temperature with heated blankets, Sienna went to work on Kodiak. She cleaned the wound again with a sterile solution, her movements swift and sure. "It's clean," she announced. "The bullet went through. No slug to dig out." She applied the thick, herbal-smelling salve and then, with skilled hands, began suturing the gash closed. As she worked, she spoke, her voice a low, steady counterpoint to the storm. "I've been seeing things, Cole, for months. Things that don't add up. We've got poachers, but they aren't taking trophies, just taking nothing but causing trouble. And there are tire tracks on the old service roads that have been closed for years. Heavy trucks, moving at night." Cole paused, looking over from the couch. "You reported it?" "Of course," she said, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. "They log it, say they'll send patrol. Nothing ever happens. It's like the reports just vanish." He watched her work, a nod of approval he didn't voice. Then he nodded slowly. A dark puzzle piece clicked into place in his mind. A cop beaten and left for dead with a message. A park ranger's reports of suspicious activity being ignored. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. As Sienna finished her work, a soft groan came from the couch. Elena was waking up, and the first words from her lips would confirm their darkest suspicions and plunge them all into a conspiracy deeper than any of them could imagine. A low groan of pain broke the rhythm of the fire, and the woman on the couch woke up, her eyes snapping open to a world she didn't recognize, her body screaming in protest. Elena's vision swam, a blur of rough-hewn timber and flickering firelight. This wasn't the cold, suffocating darkness of the forest. This wasn't the end. Her gaze darted around the room, landing first on Cole, his large frame silhouetted by the hearth. Instinctual fear widened her eyes, and she tried to sit up, a sharp gasp tearing from her lips as agony exploded from her shoulder. "Easy," Cole said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He took a half-step forward but kept a careful distance, his hands open and non-threatening. "You're safe here." Her frantic eyes then found Sienna, who offered a small, reassuring smile from her chair. "He's right. You're safe." Elena's breathing was quick and shallow. She looked down at her own body, tucked under heavy wool blankets, her torn clothes replaced by a soft, oversized flannel shirt. Panic flashed across her face as her eyes searched the room again, asking a silent, desperate question. A soft whine came from the floor by the fire. Kodiak, pushing through his own pain, lifted his head. His bandaged body was stiff, but he managed a single, weak thump of his tail against the floorboards, his dark eyes locked on her. "Kodiak," she breathed, her voice a raw, cracked whisper. A single tear tracked through the grime on her cheek. The sound was filled with profound relief and heartbreak. The sight of her loyal partner, wounded but alive, anchored her to reality. The fear began to recede, replaced by a wave of overwhelming emotion. "We found you both out in the storm," Sienna explained gently. "Cole brought you here. We've done what we can for your injuries." Elena slowly absorbed this, her gaze shifting between the calm soldier, the kind-faced ranger, and her devoted dog. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a survivor. She relaxed back against the cushions, a fresh wave of pain making her wince. She accepted a cup of warm water from Cole, her hands shaking so badly water sloshed over the rim as she drank. After a few sips, a flicker of the detective, she was returned. The confusion in her eyes sharpened into a hard, intelligent focus. "My phone," she rasped, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Did you find a phone?" Cole and Sienna exchanged a look. "There was nothing on you but your clothes and your badge," Cole said. "No weapon. No phone." Elena closed her eyes, a muscle in her jaw tightening. "Of course not. They took it." She looked at them, her expression now grim with purpose. "You both deserve to know what you've walked into. My name is Elena Reyes. I'm a detective with the Frostwood PD." She paused, gathering her strength. "Or I was. For the last 8 months, I've been deep undercover. My target is a trafficking ring that calls themselves the Glacier Wolves." At the name, Sienna's eyes widened. "The trucks?" she said, almost to herself. "The ones on the service roads." Elena nodded. "The trucks you saw, Sienna? That's them. They're not just moving drugs. They're running military-grade firearms and fentanyl. They use the national park's back roads as their private highway. It's a ghost network. She shifted, the pain a constant reminder. I finally got close. I had everything on that phone. Video, contacts, schedules, photos, the name of their leader, a man they call Kane. She looked at Cole, recognizing the cold understanding in his eyes. An operator, alone, compromised. They knew I was coming, she continued, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. The meat was a trap. They weren't just thugs. They were professionals. They moved like a fire team. They knew where to hit me where my backup wasn't. Her hand went to her bruised ribs. They tried to make me talk. When I didn't, they decided to leave us as a message. Her voice broke for the first time, her gaze shifting to Kodiak. They shot him right in front of me. They thought he was dead. Then they tied us up to storm to finish. The cabin was silent, the crackling fire the only sound against a heavy truth. Which means, Elena said, her voice hardening again, there's a leak inside the FWPD. A bad one. Someone high enough to access undercover files, monitor my movements, and clear the way for the Wolves' operations. She looked from Cole to Sienna, her eyes filled with desperate urgency. That's what you've stumbled into. This isn't just a local gang. It's deep-seated corruption. And now that they know I'm alive, they won't stop until they finish the job. Cole folded his arms across his chest. His posture as solid as the mountains outside. They won't find you here, he stated. It wasn't hope, it was a fact. Elena looked at him, truly seeing the unshakable strength in the man who had saved her. She saw the same resolve in Sienna's steady gaze. They were strangers, yet in this fragile sanctuary, she felt a flicker of something she thought had been extinguished in the frozen woods. Hope. They took my evidence, she whispered, the fight returning to her voice. But they didn't take my memory. I know their routes. I know their methods. It's all still in my head. She looked down at her hands, then back at them. I'm not asking for your help. You've already done more than enough. But I am asking you to be careful. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not. Sienna pulled her chair closer. What the Wolves are doing to our park, what they did to you and your partner. She said, nodding toward Kodiak. That's not something I can walk away from. Elena's gaze finally settled on Cole, the silent soldier. He hadn't said much, but his actions had spoken volumes. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. In that single gesture, an unspoken alliance was forged. The blizzard was dying, and when it cleared, the hunt would begin. The blizzard broke at dawn, revealing a world buried in white, and a hidden battlefield waiting to be discovered. A fragile sun rose over the snow-buried peaks, casting long blue shadows across the landscape. Inside the cabin, a tense quiet held sway. Elena sat wrapped in blankets by the fire, her arms secure in the makeshift sling, her face a mask of exhaustion and grim determination. The detective was back, her mind already reconstructing the crime scene. We have to go back, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The snow is a blessing and a curse. It covers their tracks, but it preserves everything underneath. We have a window before the sun melts it all away. Sienna, who was checking the dressing on Kodiak's flank, looked up with concern. Elena, you can barely stand. I don't need to stand. I need to see, she countered, her gaze unwavering. Cole, who had been cleaning his shotgun at the small wooden table, looked at her and saw the familiar, unyielding fire of a warrior who refused to be benched. He knew that drive. He respected it. Arguing would be pointless. We'll go, he said, giving a single decisive nod. But we move on my terms. Stay close. No risks. Kodiak seemed to understand. He pushed himself to his feet, his limp pronounced, but his posture alert. He walked over to Elena and rested his heavy head on her knee. Elena dug her good fingers into thick fur of his neck, drawing strength. His dark eyes looked up at her, as if to say he was ready. Their journey back to the ambush site was a slow, methodical procession. Cole took the lead, his movements fluid and silent as he scanned the landscape, his eyes missing nothing. He was no longer just a man on leave. He was an operator moving through potentially hostile territory. Sienna walked beside Elena, offering a steadying arm, her deep knowledge of the terrain, ensuring they took the safest path. But it was Kodiak who was truly in his element. For him, the pristine white snow was not an empty canvas. It was a diary written in a language only he could read. His nose was low to the ground, twitching, sampling the millions of scent particles trapped in the frozen air. He ignored the familiar smells of pine, squirrel, and cold stone. He was searching for the lingering, foul taint of adrenaline, gunpowder, and the specific scent of the men who had hurt his partner. "He's on to something," Sienna murmured as Kodiak veered sharply to the left of the path they had taken. He led them to the base of a large aspen, its bark scarred and white. There, half hidden by a fresh drift, was a small, dark object. Cole crouched, using a stick to carefully brush away the snow. It was a single spent shell casing. 9 millimeters, Cole said. "Examine it without touching it. Common, but it's a start." Elena's eyes narrowed. They were disciplined. They would have policed their brass. One getting missed means they were in a hurry at the end. Kodiak didn't wait. He was already moving again, pawing at another drift a few yards away. This time, he uncovered a small scrap of black industrial tape, its adhesive side stuck to a frozen leaf. Cole carefully picked it up with a pair of tweezers from his kit and dropped it into an evidence bag. Elena said, "This confirms the warehouse link. This is the same type they use to seal heavy-duty shipping crates. I saw rolls of it at a warehouse they use on the edge of town." The connection was a thin thread, but it was there. They were tying the scene directly to the wolves. It was Kodiak's next discovery that was the most significant. He let out a low, determined bark and began digging frantically near the base of the pine where the note had been pinned. Under a few inches of snow was a piece of burlap cloth, stiff with ice. As Cole lifted it, a sharp, acrid chemical odor hit the air. Sienna, who had been quietly observing, took a cautious sniff. "I've smelled something like that before," she said slowly, "near an old abandoned mine shaft on the park's northern border. We thought it was just illegal dumping." "Cutting agent," Cole said, his voice grim. "Or a precursor chemical for fentanyl production. They got sloppy. They used this as a gag or a blindfold and then discarded it. They had their evidence. 3 small, seemingly insignificant items that together told a story of professional violence, a hasty departure, and a direct link to the wolves' operation." As they started back toward the cabin, Sienna unrolled a detailed topographical map on the hood of Cole's truck. Her finger traced a path with authority. "This is where you were," she said, pointing to a spot. "And this," she moved her finger across the intricate lines, "is the old service road I told you about. It's less than half a mile from here, completely hidden. It's the perfect smuggling route." She then tapped the location of the old mine. "And the mine is right here at the end of that route. A perfect place to store things or to process them." Her map connected all the dots: the ambush site, the illegal route, and a potential base of operations. Back in the warmth of the cabin, the 3 of them stood around the table. They laid their findings on the table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The fragile hope from a night before was now solidifying into a concrete, terrifying reality. "This is bigger than we thought," Sienna said quietly, looking at the map. "They're not just passing through. They've set up shop in our backyard. And they have someone on the inside protecting them." Elena added, her hand resting on her slung arm. "We can't take any of this to the department. We don't know who to trust." She looked at Cole, her eyes filled with a new weight. "That shell casing, the tape, this is all evidence. But it's useless if we can't get it to the right people." Cole looked at the small pieces on the table, then at the 2 women beside him. He had come to these mountains seeking solitude and escape from the complexities of war. But war had a way of finding you. And now, in this quiet cabin, a new unit had been formed. "We don't go to them," Cole said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "We find a way to make them come to us." But as they plotted their counterattack, Kodiak, driven by a deep instinct, was already digging up the secret that would blow the entire conspiracy wide open and make them the most wanted targets in the state. While they planned their next move, Kodiak was already on the trail, unearthing the one piece of evidence that would change everything. The cabin hummed with new, dangerous energy. Sienna's map was spread across the table, transformed into a battle plan. The small evidence bag sat beside it, a sparse but damning collection. Kodiak stirred by the fire, his nose twitching at a scent the humans couldn't detect. He was already on the trail, his body tense with anticipation. "We're operating blind," Elena stated, her voice strained but clear. She paced a small space, the pain in her shoulder a constant throb. "The warehouse I mentioned is our best bet. If they move product, there will be signs. Fresh tracks, new locks, anything." Cole's eyes were fixed on the map, his mind breaking down the problem into tactical objectives. Going in heavy is out. We need intelligence. We go into town, but we don't look like we're looking. We're tourists, just another couple enjoying the post-storm scenery. He looked at Elena. "Think you can handle that?" A flicker of her old, confident smile touched her lips. "I can handle playing a tourist. It's the walking that's the problem." "I'll be your crutch," he said simply. Sienna had her own role. "I know someone in the county records office. If I ask about land surveys near the mine for a park project, he might tell me who owns the warehouse without realizing it." The plan was set. As Elena changed into borrowed clothes and they prepared to leave, Cole knelt before Kodiak. The dog's eyes were bright and alert. He whined softly, watching them get ready. "You're on guard duty, big guy," Cole said, scratching behind his ears. "Watch the fort. We'll be back." Kodiak seemed to understand, settling onto his rug with a resigned sigh, his gaze fixed on them until the door closed. But the shepherd's rest was short-lived. A deeper instinct stirred, a scent. It was faint, carried on the cold air seeping to the cabin walls. The lingering ghost of the men who had attacked them. It was strongest near the back, by the old woodshed. He got his feet, his limb pronounced. He padded outside, his nose to the ground. The smell was there, mixed with pine and earth, where the snow was thinnest near the shed's foundation. The same acrid fear and malice from the forest. He followed it to a mound of firewood stacked against the wall. Here, the scent was overpowering. Driven by an instinct he didn't understand, he began to dig. He dug despite the protest in his flank, driven by duty. His front paws worked at the dirt and icy snow, ignoring the pain. He clawed away layers with chips and frozen soil until his paw hit something that wasn't earth or rock. It was a small black nylon bag, its fabric stiff with frost. He clamped his teeth onto the strap and, with a surge of effort, dragged it from its shallow grave toward the cabin's back porch. When Cole and Elena returned at dusk, their faces were grim. They had seen tire tracks at the warehouse matching the one Sienna had described, but their news was overshadowed by what they found on the porch. Sienna met them, her expression tense. The local permits for that warehouse were fast-tracked, she told them. Signed by a lieutenant at the FWPD, Marcus Sterling. Elena recoiled as if struck. Sterling. Her voice was a whisper. Lieutenant Marcus Sterling was her direct supervisor, the charismatic, ambitious officer who had personally recommended her for the undercover assignment, the last person she would have suspected before the weight of that betrayal could fully crush her. Cole, doing a perimeter check, called out, "Sienna, Elena, you need to see this." On the back porch lay the muddy bag, with a very proud Kodiak sitting beside it. "Kodiak," Elena breathed, rushing to him. "What did you find?" They brought the bag inside. Cole handled it with gloves. Inside, sealed in a plastic case, were a dozen SIM cards and a single, mud-smeared USB drive. A disposable intelligence kit, the kind men bury when they think all witnesses are dead. Cole booted his hardened, offline laptop. He cleaned the drive and inserted it. The contents appeared on the screen, encrypted spreadsheets, shipping manifests, burner phone lists. But it was the last file that made the air turn to ice. It was a series of internal police dispatch logs. Every time a major wolf shipment was scheduled, the patrol car in that sector was rerouted by a last-minute authorization code. Elena leaned closer, her face pale. That's the supervisor's override code. Every lieutenant has one. She clicked on the digital signature attached to the overrides. A name and badge number appeared, stark and undeniable on the screen. LTM, Sterling #718. There it was. The man who had been her mentor, who had sent her into the lion's den, was the one holding the door open for the lions. The pieces were no longer scattered. They formed a single, horrifying picture. Sienna sank into a chair. Elena stood motionless. The betrayal of physical blow. Cole looked from the screen to Elena, then to the dog at her feet. Kodiak hadn't just found a bag. He had unearthed the viper hiding in the heart of the Frostwood Police Department. And in that moment, they knew Sterling would soon realize his secret was out, and he would send every killer at his disposal to silence them for good. And outside, a shadow moved in the tree line. The hunt had already begun. The first warning didn't come from a human. It came from a low, deep growl that rumbled in Kodiak's chest, a sound of pure threat that snapped everyone to attention. The German shepherd was on his feet, ears swiveled toward the northern wall of the cabin, his body coiled tight. The fur along his spine stood rigid. He stared into the darkness outside, sensing a presence the humans could not yet detect. "They're here," Cole said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The time for planning was over. He grabbed his shotgun and handed it to Elena. "You take the front window. Don't fire unless I do. Sienna, stay clear of the windows. Get the medical kit ready." Elena's hands were steady as she took the weapon, her police training an anchor in the chaos. Sienna, pale but resolute, began laying out bandages and antiseptic. Cole moved toward the back, but Kodiak blocked his path. The dog whined, high and urgent, nudging Cole's leg away from the door and toward a side window. He looked pointedly outside toward the woodshed. Cole followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing. He crept to the side window, peering into the moonlit snow, and then he saw it, a thin, almost invisible line stretched between a tree and the woodshed, a trip wire. His eyes traced it to a small, dark block half buried in the snow, a pressure plate IED. "Clear the back wall," he ordered in a sharp whisper. "They've set a trap." Kodiak had just saved them from walking into a kill zone. Cole slipped out the front door, melting into the shadows. He moved swiftly, stringing his own thin cords between trees, attaching clusters of empty cans. They weren't deadly, but they were alarms, a way to turn his woods into a confusing maze for the hunters. He was setting the last wire when he heard it, the snap of a twig, too loud to be an animal. He slid back inside just as 6 dark figures emerged from the tree line in a practice wedge formation. One broke off, circling toward the back. His boot caught Cole's tripwire. A cascade of clattering cans shattered the silence. The man cursed, diving for cover. The night erupted. Cole fired a single controlled shotgun blast into a tree trunk above the man, the deafening roar forcing him down. From the front window, Elena fired a precise shot that kicked up snow at another attacker's feet, driving him back. The wolves were caught off guard. They had expected scared victims, not a coordinated defense. They returned fire, bullets thudding into the cabin's thick log walls. "They're trying to flank us from the west." Cole yelled. He grabbed 2 smoke grenades. "Cover your faces." He tossed them out a side window. Thick, choking smoke billowed out, obscuring the attacker's view. Under this cover, Cole slipped outside again. He moved like a predator in his own territory. One attacker, a wiry man with a hawk tattoo on his neck, stepped backward into one of Cole's simple snares. The cord pulled tight around his ankle, sending him sprawling. Cole was on him in a second. 3 moves, a strike, a flip, zip ties. The man was secured. Her eyes locked on Cole, fear for him eclipsing her own. Elena provided cover fire, her shots controlled, keeping the other wolves pinned down. Cole dragged the captured man back toward the cabin, and they tumbled inside as Sienna slammed the door shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place. Their prisoner, a young man named Rico, breathed heavily, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He stared at the determined faces surrounding him. Outside, the remaining wolves, their element as a prize gone, and one of their own captured, faded back into the forest. Silence returned, thick and heavy, smelling of gunpowder and smoke. They had held the line. They had survived. And now, tied to the chair in the middle of the room, they had a direct link to the man who wanted them dead. But as they stared down their captured enemy, they knew this was only the beginning. The man in the chair held the key to the viper's nest, and they had to make him talk before his friends regrouped and came back for him. The prisoner, a wiry man named Rico, sat tied to a chair, his eyes darting around the cabin like a cornered animal. He knew his luck had just run out. The smell of gunpowder was replaced by the scent of stale fear. Rico was young, maybe mid-20s, his face hardened by a life of violence, but now etched with pure panic. The bravado he'd had in the woods was gone, stripped away by failure and capture. The interrogation wasn't brutal. Cole didn't lay a hand on him. He didn't need to. He simply stood before Rico, arms folded, his sheer presence an intimidating force of calm, lethal capability. It was more terrifying than any overt threat. Cole let the silence stretch, making Rico fill it with confession. "We know who you work for," Elena began, her voice cold and steady. She stood to the side, her injured arm in a sling, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Elena's knuckles were white where she gripped her sling. "We know about the shipments. We know about the warehouse." Rico spat on the floor. "I don't know anything." Cole said nothing. He just watched, letting the silence stretch again. In the quiet cabin, with the memory of the failed siege still fresh, the silence was its own form of pressure. "We also know about Lieutenant Sterling," Elena said, dropping the name like a stone. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear crossed Rico's face. He visibly flinched. Mentioning the gang was one thing. Mentioning the corrupt cop was another. It meant they knew how deep the rot went. "Sterling is your protection," Elena continued, pressing the advantage. "He clears your routes, erases your evidence. But what happens when we give his name to the feds? He'll burn everyone to save himself. And the first person he'll burn is a man who failed to silence the witnesses." She let that sink in. "He'll name you, Rico. He'll say you were the leader of the assault. He'll offer you up to save his own skin." The man's jaw worked silently. He looked at Cole, then back at Elena. He saw no mercy, but he also saw a sliver of opportunity. "What do you want?" he finally rasped. "A name," Cole said, speaking for the first time, his voice a low growl. "The man at the top, the one Sterling answers to." Rico hesitated, his loyalty warring with his survival instinct. Then he slumped in the chair, the fight draining out of him. "Kane," he muttered. "They call him Kane. He runs a whole mountain range. Sterling is just his pet cop." The name, the one Elena had heard whispered during her undercover work, now had a direct link to the law. They had the connection. "We have what we need," Elena said to Cole, turning her back on the prisoner. She moved to the table where the satellite phone lay. "There's one person I trust. He's with the DEA. He's the reason I took this assignment." She looked at Cole. "I need to make this call." Cole nodded, handing her the phone. He understood the need for a trusted ally. Elena dialed her brother, DEA Agent Ben Carter. After a few tense rings, a man's voice, sharp and alert, answered. "It's me," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't shown until now. On the other end was Agent Ben Carter of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He was her older brother, a man whose life's work was dismantling organizations like the Wolves, and whose biggest fear had been the danger his sister was in. "Elena, my God, where you? You dropped off the grid." "I'm alive, Ben. I'm okay," she said, cutting him off. "Listen, I was compromised. Sterling is dirty. He's been feeding intel to the Wolves." She quickly explained the situation, her voice low and urgent. "I'm sending you a data package. Everything I had, plus what we found since. It's all there. The routes, the names, the proof against Sterling. Stay where you are." Ben's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Don't move. Don't trust anyone. I'll get a team, but I have to do this off book. If Sterling has eyes on the department, he might get tipped off. Give me the coordinates." After sending the encrypted file and their location, Elena hung up. The weight on her shoulders seemed to lift slightly. They were no longer alone. As she finished the call, Sienna, who had been checking on Kodiak, spoke up, her voice filled with concern. "The firefight aggravated his wound. He needs proper treatment, Cole. Stitches and antibiotics I don't have. He's burning up." Elena looked at her partner, her heart aching. Kodiak was panting heavily, his eyes glazed with fever. They had a plan and federal backup on the way, but their most loyal defender was now fighting for his life. The fever was a clock ticking down, and it was running faster than their rescue. With their ally bleeding out and a corrupt lieutenant hunting them, they were forced to make a move that would break their team apart. "She's right," Elena said, her voice tight as she looked at Kodiak. The shepherd was panting, his eyes glazed with fever. "We have to get him help, but we can't take him to a local vet. Sterling might have them watched." "I know a place," Sienna said immediately. "An old vet lives deep in the valley, a friend of my grandfather's. He's off-grid. Trust the government about as far as he can throw it. He asks no questions. I can take Kodiak there. He'll be safe, and he'll get the care he needs." The decision was made. A silent, painful farewell passed between Elena and her dog. She knelt, pressing her forehead against his, whispering promises. "Be strong, boy. I'll come back for you." Kodiak licked a tear from Elena's face, his tail giving a faint thump. Sienna led him gently toward her truck, leaving Cole and Elena alone with their prisoner and their escalating war. With the data now in the hands of the DA, their objective shifted. It was no longer just about survival. It was about ending this. "Rico," Cole said, turning back to the prisoner, "your boss, Kane. When's the next big shipment?" Terrified and seeing a chance to save himself, Rico talked. He told them about a major delivery of fentanyl precursors scheduled for 2 nights from now. It was happening at the old abandoned mine Sienna had identified on her map, the Wolves' primary hub. A plan began to form, a dangerous gambit built on their new intelligence. Ben and his team won't get here in time to set up a full-scale raid without tipping off Sterling, Elena reasoned. "We need to control the board." "So we change the game," Cole said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic light. "We leak new intel. We leak a fake tip. We draw them into a canyon. We trap them." Sienna's map was their battlefield. He crafted the message with a liar's precision. "We can use one of the burner SIM cards," Elena suggested. "Send a message to a number on Kane's contact list. A fake tip about a rival gang planning to hijack the shipment. We make them nervous," Cole continued, "and we give them a solution." He pointed to a spot on the map Sienna had marked. A narrow, isolated canyon with only one way in and one way out. A perfect kill box. "We suggest a new, safer location for the meet, a place of our choosing. We draw Kane and his inner circle there," Elena finished, her voice filled with dangerous resolve. "And if we can make Sterling believe his entire operation is at risk, he'll show up, too, to personally oversee his investment. It was a conspiracy of their own, a plan to use the enemy's network against them, to draw the wolves out of their nest and into a trap." As night fell, Sienna returned, her mission successful. "Kodiak is safe," she reported, the relief evident on her face. "Doc says he'll pull through. He's strong." The news was a balm to Elena's frayed nerves. With their most vulnerable member secured, the team was ready. Cole prepared the message, his words carefully crafted to sound like a panicked informant. He sent it via the burner SIM, then destroyed the card. The bait was set. Now they had to prepare the trap. The canyon was a brutal, unforgiving place, all sharp rocks and steep walls. Under a moonless, star-riddled sky, it felt like the end of the world. The bait was set. Now they had to hope the wolves took it and didn't smell the trap. The canyon was a dead end in every sense of the word, and they were about to lure a wolf pack straight into it. Cole lay prone on a high ledge, the cold granite seeping through his clothes. A suppressed rifle rested on his pack, his eye glued to the night vision scope, scanning the canyon floor below. He was a ghost, a part of the rock itself. Down by the canyon's entrance, Elena was positioned behind a cluster of boulders, a pistol held steady in her good hand. She wasn't alone. Her brother, DEA agent Ben Carter, and 2 of his men were with her, their dark tactical gear making them nearly invisible. Sienna was their lookout, positioned high on the opposite rim with a powerful scope, her voice a soft whisper in their encrypted earpieces. No movement on the approach. The valley is quiet. They didn't have to wait long. Engines growled. Headlights off. Men emerged, armed. Two heavy-duty trucks navigated the treacherous service road and rolled into the canyon's mouth before stopping. Men began to disembark, their movements disciplined, their silhouettes holding the unmistakable shape of rifles. From the lead truck, two figures emerged. The first was tall and gaunt, with cruel slash of a mouth and dead, predatory eyes. Kane. The second man was Lieutenant Marcus Sterling. He wore a tactical jacket, but it now looked like the costume of the traitor he was. His usually charismatic face was tense, etched with greed and paranoia. Then the rear doors of the second truck opened. The horror of what happened next stole the breath from everyone watching. A man pulled out three children, none older than 12, their faces pale with terror in the dim light. One small girl stood frozen, silent tears cutting paths through the dirt on her face. Each child clutched a small, heavy duffel bag. The wolves were using them as mules, a human shield against interception. "Command, we have visual on the packages." 3 juvenile mules. Ben whispered into his comms, his voice tight. "I repeat, 3 juveniles on site." The deal was about to go down when Ben gave the signal. Blinding lights erupted from both ends of the canyon, turning night into artificial day. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Ben's voice boomed over a loudspeaker, echoing off the rock walls. Chaos erupted. Kane and his men opened fire, their automatic weapons spitting flashes of orange into the darkness. But Sterling did the unthinkable. He lunged to the nearest child, the small girl, pulling her in front of him as a living shield. "Stay back!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic, his pistol pressed hard against her temple. "I'll kill her. I'll do it." The DA agents froze. The firefight faltered. Sterling began to back away, dragging the sobbing child with him toward the relative cover of the trucks. It was a nightmare scenario, playing out in real time. It was in that moment of frozen horror that a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, powerful bark echoed from the ridge above the canyon entrance. Standing there, silhouetted against the powerful lights, was Sienna, and beside her, poised and ready, was Kodiak. Cole's that phone call had brought them. Kodiak, healed and ready. It was a risk, but one he had to take. The old vet had worked wonders. Kodiak was healed, his body a coiled spring of muscle and loyalty. "Kodiak, no!" Elena's scream was ripped from her throat, filled with equal parts anguish for her partner and the child. But the dog was already moving. He launched himself on the ridge, a black and sable missile of pure fury. He charged through bullets kicking up to around him, eyes only on Sterling. He landed with a thud and charged, ignoring the danger. His eyes, burning with canine intelligence, were locked on one target, Sterling. The corrupt lieutenant turned, his eyes widening in surprise at this new, unexpected threat. That split second of hesitation was all it took. Kodiak slammed into him, and in the violent struggle that followed, a single shot would ring out, deciding the fate of everyone in the canyon and changing their lives forever. Kodiak hit Sterling like a 70-pound battering ram, and the gunshot that followed wasn't from the lieutenant's weapon. The German shepherd didn't bite or maul. He used his full weight like the tactical instrument he was trained to be, slamming into Sterling's side with enough force to knock the man off balance. The corrupt lieutenant stumbled backward, his grip on the girl breaking as he flailed for balance. The child scrambled away toward the nearest DEA agent. Sterling, enraged and desperate, raised his pistol to shoot the dog point blank. He never got the chance. A single, precise shot cracked through the chaos from the ridge above. It wasn't the loud report of a shotgun, but the sharp, efficient sound of a high-velocity rifle. The bullet struck Sterling's pistol, tearing it from his hand and sending it clattering across the rocks. He screamed, clutching his shattered fingers. From his perch, Cole cycled the bolt on his rifle, his breathing even. Target neutralized. In that same moment, Elena surged forward. Ignoring the fire in her injured shoulder, she tackled Sterling to the ground. The satisfying metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the canyon. "Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest. For every cop you betrayed, you son of a bitch," she growled into his ear, the words carrying a lifetime of betrayed trust. With their leader captured and their human shield gone, the fight drained from the remaining wolves. Ben Carter had Kane subdued and cuffed. Seeing their leader forcibly subdued by the DEA team, they dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. The trap had closed perfectly. The canyon, momentofore filled with violence, was now filled with the sounds of sobbing children being comforted and the brisk, professional commands of federal agents securing the scene. In the sudden quiet, only the sobbing of the rescued children could be heard. Elena stood over Sterling, her chest heaving, not from exertion but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. She looked up as Cole descended from the ridge, his rifle slung. Their eyes met, and a look of profound, unspoken respect passed between them. He had trusted her plan, and she had trusted his aim. Ben approached, clapping his sister gently on her uninjured shoulder. "It's over, Elena. It's really over." She nodded, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving her trembling. Her gaze found Kodiak, who stood panting but proud beside Sienna. She knelt, and he limped over to her, nuzzling her face. "Good boy," she whispered into his fur, her voice cracking. "You brave, good boy." The children, traumatized but physically unharmed, were wrapped in emergency blankets and led to a waiting agency vehicle. They would be reunited with their families by morning. Kane, his hands zip-tied behind his back, was marched past Sterling. The crime lord's cold eyes held no loyalty for his fallen accomplice. "You should have made sure she died in the snow," he spat at Sterling, who could only hang his head in shame and defeat. As the DEA processed the scene, Cole, Elena, and Sienna stood together in a quiet circle. The three of them, a soldier, a detective, and a ranger, had become an unstoppable force. "We did it," Sienna said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." Elena looked from her to Cole. "We couldn't have done it without you. Either of you." Cole gave a small, rare smile. "You were the catalyst, Reyes. We just evened the odds." The first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, washing the stars away. The long, dark night was finally over. But as the sun rose on their hard-won victory, a new challenge emerged, not from a criminal, but from a system that would now demand answers, and a future that would test the bonds they had forged in fire and blood. In the weeks that followed, the thaw that came to Frostwood wasn't just seasonal. It was a spiritual unburdening that lifted a darkness from the entire town. The official ceremonies were many. Elena Reyes stood at attention in the Frostwood Town Hall, her posture straight, her arm free of its sling. The mayor gave a moving speech about courage and integrity, his voice echoing through the packed room. Her badge was officially reinstated, polished to a brilliant shine. The mayor pinned the badge on Elena, but her eyes were on the rescued children in the front row. Her brother, Ben, stood beside her, his DA dress uniform crisp, as he pinned a commendation for valor onto her jacket. The true guests of honor, the three rescued children and their families, sat in the front row, their smiles and tears the only reward Elena would ever need. Cole Anders was not in attendance. His commendation from Naval Special Warfare Command had arrived in a plain, sealed envelope with no return address. He read the formal language once, then burned it in the fireplace. His reward was a profound silence that had finally returned to his mountains, a silence he had now earned, not just borrowed. Sienna Reed, however, found herself in the spotlight she had always avoided. With the massive assets seized from the Glacier Wolves operation, a federal grant was fast-tracked. The funding was approved for construction of the Frostwood Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Center, a state-of-the-art facility to heal the land she loved. The press release named her as its founding director. Her quiet dedication had been recognized, and her life's purpose was suddenly laid out before her in concrete and promise. One afternoon, the four of them, the core of their makeshift family, met on a sun-drenched ridge overlooking the town. The air was warm, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Cole leaned against a tree, a genuine, relaxed smile softening his features. His hand rested on Kodiak's head, his shoulder brushing Elena's. Elena stood beside him, her gaze peaceful as she watched the town below. Sienna clutched a folder of architectural blueprints, her eyes alight with a vibrant future. And at their feet, sitting proudly with his head held high, was Kodiak, a new, custom-made K9 collar, fashioned from dark leather, gleamed in the sun. A small silver medal, a token from a grateful police department, was attached to it. He looked from Elena to Cole, then to Sienna, his tail giving a slow, contented thump against the ground. "Look at it," Sienna said softly, her gaze sweeping across the valley. "It feels different now, like it can breathe again." "That's what justice feels like," Elena replied, reaching down to scratch Kodiak behind his ears. She then looked at Cole, her expression filled with a gratitude too deep for words. "You came here to escape all this. I'm sorry we dragged you back into fight." Cole shook his head, his eyes meeting hers. "I've learned something," he said, his voice thoughtful. He paused, letting the words find their space. "Peace isn't about finding a quiet place. It's about making a quiet place. We did that." They stood together in a comfortable silence, a unit forged in the crucible of a blizzard, a soldier who had rediscovered his purpose, a detective who had reclaimed her town, a ranger who would now protect its wild heart, and a hero dog who had saved them all. It was a picture of a hard-won peace, a new beginning for each of them, the place they all, in their own way, call home. But as they enjoyed the quiet, a single, unmarked envelope delivered to Cole's cabin would prove that the past is never truly buried, and the skills of a soldier like his would always be in demand by shadows he thought he'd left behind. The envelope was blank, but the message inside was a direct shot from a past he'd tried to bury. It appeared 1 week after the canyon, wedged in the doorframe, a white slash against the dark wood. No postmark, no return address, just his name, Cole Anders, typed in a stark, utilitarian font. The peace he had just fought for felt suddenly fragile. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper. The message was brief, typed with the same clinical efficiency. *Anders. The work in Frostwood was impressive, if messy. Your particular skills remain a valued asset. A situation has arisen in the Alaskan interior. A corporate extraction team has gone dark. The client believes local elements are involved. Your profile is the best fit. Coordinates and briefing package to follow via secure channel. Acknowledge, Briggs, Commander Briggs, the man who had been both his mentor and his taskmaster for a decade, the man who knew how to weaponize guilt and obligation. This wasn't a request. It was a summons, wrapped in the language of a man who was used to being obeyed. Cole stood on his porch, the paper feeling like a warrant for his soul, a cold dread settling in his gut. The sun was warm on his face. The valley below was peaceful, and for the first time in years, he had something resembling a life. He had neighbors who weren't just shadows, a purpose that wasn't defined by a scope's crosshairs. He heard the familiar, steady crunch of boots on gravel. Elena approached, Kodiak trotting at her side. She had taken to walking the trail to his cabin most afternoons, a quiet routine that had become the best part of his day. Her smile faded as she saw his expression. "Cole, what is it?" He handed her the letter without a word. She read it quickly, her detective's eyes scanning the lines, her brow furrowing. "Briggs, this is from your old commander." She looked up, her gaze sharp with concern. "What does he mean? Acknowledge?" "It means I have to answer him," Cole said, his voice low. "It means he's giving me a choice, but it's a choice with consequences. If I ignore him, he'll send someone else, someone who might not care about the collateral damage. And if you answer?" Elena asked, though she already knew. "Then I'm back in," he said, turning to look at the mountains. "I'm back in that world, the one I came here to forget." He looked at her, simplifying the jargon. "A team is missing. He thinks I'm the only one who can get them out." The silence between them was heavy. Kodiak whined softly, nudging Cole's hand as if sensing his turmoil. "You don't have to do this," Elena said firmly. "You're out. You've done your duty 100 times over. This," she gestured to the land around them, "this is your life now. We are your life now." Cole looked from her determined face to the dog, to the cabin that had become a home. He thought of the deafening silence of the tundra, the feeling of a rifle stock against his cheek, the cold, impersonal nature of a corporate extraction. Then he thought of the warmth of the fireplace, The shared silence with Elena, the simple, profound trust in the dog's eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "but Briggs doesn't contact me for trivial reasons. If he's reaching out, the situation is bad. And if it's bad and I could have helped..." He let the sentence hang, the weight of his own conscience filling the space. He was being asked to choose between the peace he had just won and the duty that was etched into his bones. The paper in his hand felt heavier than any rifle he'd ever carried. The satellite phone felt heavier than a rifle in Cole's hands, its silence screaming the question he had to answer. He sat at his rough-hewn table, the unmarked envelope before him. Elena watched him from across the room, her arms crossed, not in anger but in solidarity. She knew the weight of duty. Kodiak lay at her feet, his head on his paws, his eyes tracking Cole's every slight movement. Cole's hand hovered over the sat phone. To send the message was to erase the man he'd become here. To not send it was to betray the man he'd always been. "He's not giving you a choice, Cole," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He's presenting an order as an option. That's what men like him do." "I know," Cole replied, his voice a low rumble. "But the situation he's describing, if a corporate team went dark in that part of Alaska, it's not just local elements. It's something worse." "Then let the military handle it," Elena countered. "You're not the only capable person left in the world." "That's just it," Cole said, looking up at her, his eyes haunted. "For this kind of problem, in that specific terrain, Briggs probably thinks I am, and he's rarely wrong about tactical assessments." He picked up the sat phone. Sending an acknowledgement wasn't just saying yes. It was reactivating a part of himself he had worked hard to silence. It was stepping back into a world of moral compromises and perpetual twilight. It was leaving. Elena saw the conflict tearing him apart. She walked over and placed her hand over his on the phone. Her touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold plastic. "Look at me," she said. He met her gaze. "What do you want?" "Not what Briggs wants. Not what your duty says. What does Cole Anders want?" He looked around the cabin. At the firewood he had split himself. At the maps on the wall, now marked with memories of a shared fight instead of potential threats. At the woman in front of him, who had seen him at his most raw and hadn't flinched. At the dog who had become his shadow. He wanted this. The messy, complicated, quiet life. But the ghost of the man he used to be whispered of a different kind of duty. He took a deep, slow breath, his decision crystallizing. It wasn't about Briggs. It was about him. His fingers moved over the keypad. He typed a single word that would tear him from this piece. Acknowledged. He hit send. The message whooshed away into the ether. He set the phone down and looked at Elena, expecting to see disappointment. Instead, she simply nodded. "Okay," she said. "That's it?" he asked, surprised by her calm acceptance. "You made a choice. A hard one." She didn't pull away. Her hand covered his on the phone, a bridge between his two worlds. "Just promise me you're coming back. This isn't you running away from here. This is you tidying up a loose end from your old life." "I promise," he said, the words feeling more sacred than any oath he'd ever sworn in the service. "This is me making sure that world doesn't ever have to touch this one again." He had chosen to walk back into the shadows, not because he belonged there, but to ensure they would never darken his door again. But as he packed his gear, the secure channel chirped, delivering the briefing package. And the first photo made his blood run cold. The corporate extraction team included a face he never thought he'd see again, a ghost from his past who made this mission painfully, terrifyingly personal. The Alaskan mission was a frozen hell, a brutal reminder of a life he thought he'd left behind. But it was the thought of the cabin and the woman waiting in it that pulled him through. For 3 weeks, Cole operated in a world of white noise and whiteout conditions. The corporate extraction was a cover for a rogue paramilitary unit selling stolen bioweapon data. The ghost from his past, a former teammate named Davos, was leading them. The confrontation was swift, violent, and final. There were no grand speeches, just a grim, efficient work of stopping a threat. When it was over, Cole made sure the data was destroyed, and Davos was beyond causing any more harm. He left the cleanup to others, his part done. He returned to Frostwood as the last of the autumn color was bleeding from the trees. He didn't announce his arrival. He simply appeared at his cabin door one evening, looking older, wearier, but with new stillness in his eyes. The ghosts he'd gone confront had been laid to rest. Elena was there, waiting. She had kept the fire lit and the cabin clean. She didn't rush to him or barrage him with questions. She straightened the collar of his coat, a silent gesture of reclaiming normalcy. She simply looked at him, saw the peace he had fought for in Alaska, and said, "You're home." It was the only welcome he needed. The following week, they stood together on the same ridge overlooking the town. The air was crisp, smelling with smoke and decaying leaves. Below, the framework of Siena's new wildlife rescue center was rising from the ground, a symbol of healing and new beginnings. Kodiak sat between them, his coat thick and healthy for the coming winter, the silver medal on his collar glinting. He was the living, breathing proof of their shared victory. "It's finally over, isn't it?" Elena said, more a statement than a question. "It is," Cole confirmed, his voice surer. He stood straighter, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. "The loose end is tied. Briggs won't call again." He had closed that door himself, permanently. He looked at her, then down at the dog, then out at the valley. The silence that surrounded them wasn't the empty silence he had originally sought. This silence held the crackle of their fire, the rhythm of their breathing, the promise of tomorrow. It was the silence of a world made right. "I meant what I said," he told her, his gaze steady. "Peace isn't about finding a quiet place. It's about making one." He had made his. He had fought for it, bled for it, and nearly left it behind to protect it. And now he was going to live in it. Elena slipped her hand into his. Her grip was strong, certain. "So let's enjoy the quiet we made." They stood there as the sun dipped below the peaks, casting the valley in long, peaceful shadows. A soldier who had finally come home, a detective who had found a new partner, and the hero dog who had brought them together. The story of the blizzard, the betrayal, and the canyon was already becoming a legend in Frostwood, a tale of courage and loyalty. But for the three figures on the ridge, it was simply their past. Their present was a quiet, steadfast certainty of the future they would build together, in the place they had fought to protect, the place they all called home. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, a single, contented thump of Kodiak's tail against the frosty ground was the only sound they needed to hear, a perfect rhythm in the quiet place they had made. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.